Her family sent the ugly sister as a cruel joke to a lonely cowboy. They expected him to cast her out. But they didn't know that her quiet strength and gentle way with horses were exactly what he had been praying for. This is their story. Jedediah Vance was a man carved from the very cedar and granite of the Montana mountains. His face was a map of long days under a harsh sun and a quiet, settled sorrow that had taken root in his eyes a decade ago. He was the master of the Flying T Ranch, a spread known throughout the territory for one thing, producing the finest, most loyal horses a man could buy. Jed had a gift, a way of speaking to horses not with force, but with a quiet, patient understanding. He could tame the wildest Mustang, heal the most broken spirit. But the one thing he could not heal was the profound silence in his own home. 10 years ago, a fever had stolen his wife and young son, leaving behind a silence that was less about peace and more about absence. He had poured all his energy, all his grief, into his work, into his horses. They were his family, his purpose. But as the years wore on, the loneliness had become a physical weight. He didn't crave beauty or passion. He craved a partner, a companion to share the quiet sunrises and the heavy burden of running a ranch. So, with a practicality that defined him, he had done what many lonely men on the frontier did. He had arranged for a mail-order bride. He had corresponded for months with the Lowell family from Ohio. They had sent a photograph of their eldest daughter, Lily, a woman of stunning porcelain beauty, with golden hair and a confident smile. In her letters, she spoke of a desire for adventure and a new life. Jed wasn't fooled by pretty words, but he allowed himself a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this woman could bring a little light back into his shadowed world. The day of her arrival came. Jed stood on the platform of the dusty train station, holding the photograph of the beautiful Lily. The train arrived with a great hiss of steam and a clamor of greetings as families were reunited. He watched, his heart beating with a nervous rhythm he hadn't felt in years. But as the last of the passengers departed, there was no sign of the golden-haired woman from the picture. His hope began to curdle into a familiar disappointment. He was about to turn and leave when he saw it. At the very end of the train, a simple, rough-hewn freight wagon was being unloaded. And sitting amidst the crates and barrels was a young woman. It was not Lily. This woman was small and plainly dressed in a worn, gray traveling dress. Her dark hair was windswept and pulled back in a simple braid. As she looked up, he saw a faint, silvery scar that cut through her left eyebrow, giving her a permanently worried expression. This was Rose Lowell, Lily's younger sister. She approached him hesitantly, her shoulders slumped, not just from weariness, but from a lifetime of being overlooked. She did not meet his eyes. Instead, she held out a sealed envelope. Jed took the letter, his face an unreadable mask. He opened it. The words inside were not an apology. They were a dismissal, wrapped in the guise of a business transaction. The letter, written by Rose's mother, explained in a cold, detached tone that Lily had received a more suitable offer from a wealthy suitor and would not be coming. However, as they had a contract, they were sending Rose in her place. The letter ended with a line that dripped with a casual, familial cruelty. She is a plain girl, but a hard worker. We are sure she will be of some use to you. A hot, bitter anger coiled in Jed's gut. Anger at the deceit, at the callous way this family had treated their own daughter, shipping her across the country like a piece of unwanted livestock. This wasn't a marriage contract. It was a cruel joke, and Rose was the punchline. He looked from the letter to the young woman standing before him. She was staring at the ground, her hands clenched tightly around a small, worn satchel, clearly expecting, and perhaps even accepting, the rejection that was sure to come. He was about to tell her he would buy her a ticket back on the next train. But then he looked at her hands. They were not the soft, delicate hands of a lady. They were chapped and calloused, the knuckles slightly swollen. These were not the hands of a doll. These were the hands of a worker, a survivor. He looked at her face again, past the scar, and saw not ugliness, but a profound sadness, a quiet strength, and a deep, abiding kindness in her eyes. He saw a soul as lonely as his own. He had asked for a beautiful wife, but what he had prayed for in the deepest, most silent corners of his heart was a partner. He folded the cruel letter and tucked it into his pocket. He looked at Rose, and for the first time, he spoke to her, his voice a low, steady rumble. "The ranch is this way." It was not a question. It was a statement, an acceptance. Rose looked up, her eyes wide with a shocked disbelief. She had been braced for anger, for rejection, for humiliation. She had not been prepared for simple, quiet dignity. Without another word, Jedediah Vance, the lonely cowboy, turned and led his unexpected, ugly bride towards the wagon and the horses that would take them to their new, uncertain life together. The journey to the Flying T Ranch was a long one, measured not in miles, but in the vast, echoing silences between them. Rose sat stiffly on the wagon seat, clutching her small satchel, her mind a whirlwind of fear and a fragile, unfamiliar hope. She had spent her entire life in the shadow of her beautiful sister, Lily, constantly reminded of her own plainness, her own lack of value. Being sent here was supposed to be the final, ultimate rejection, a confirmation of her worthlessness. Yet, the quiet, stoic man beside her had not rejected her. He had simply accepted. This quiet acceptance was more unsettling to her than any anger would have been. She did not know how to navigate a world where she wasn't being actively dismissed. Jed, for his part, drove the wagon in a state of deep inner turmoil. He was a man of his word, and a contract was a contract. But this was not the partnership he had envisioned. The silence in the wagon was a heavy cloak, reminding him of the deeper silence that awaited him at his empty ranch house. He glanced at Rose, at her straight back, and the determined set of her jaw. She was not what he had ordered, but he could not deny the quiet dignity she possessed. He felt not cheated, but perplexed. He had sent for a songbird and had received a sparrow. He was not yet sure if he was disappointed. The ranch house, a sturdy, sprawling log structure, was much larger and more impressive than Rose had imagined. But like its owner, it was profoundly lonely. It was a man's home, clean and functional, but lacking any touch of warmth or femininity. Jed showed her to a small, sparse room at the back of the house, a room clearly meant for a guest, not a wife. He explained the workings of the household with a polite but formal distance, his words practical and to the point. He then retreated to his own world, the world he understood best, the world of his horses. The days that followed fell into a rigid, silent routine. Rose, expecting to be sent back at any moment, threw herself into work with a desperate, tireless energy. She rose before dawn, cooking, cleaning, mending, tending to the small vegetable patch behind the house. She was trying to prove her worth, to pay for her keep, to show the quiet cowboy that the one true thing in her mother's cruel letter was that she was, indeed, a hard worker. She never complained, never asked for anything, moving through his house like a quiet, efficient ghost. Jed watched her from a distance. He saw her industry, her quiet competence. He saw the way she meticulously weeded the garden, the same garden his late wife had once tended, and felt a strange pang in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. But the chasm of their strange arrangement remained between them. He took his meals with her at the large, empty kitchen table, the silence broken only by the clinking of their forks. He would thank her politely for the meal, and then he would retreat. His true solace was in the far corral. There, he kept a horse that was the living embodiment of his own untamed heart. She was a magnificent Palomino mare, captured from the wild a year ago, a creature of such fire and spirit that no man on the ranch could get near her. They called her Ghost, for she moved like a phantom and seemed to pass through fences as if they weren't there. She was proud, intelligent, and utterly unbroken. While other men saw a lost cause, Jed saw a kindred spirit. He would spend hours with her, not trying to break her, but simply being with her, speaking to her in a low, quiet murmur, recognizing in her wildness the same stubborn refusal to be tamed that he felt in his own grieving soul. He did not know how to bridge the silence with a woman in his house, so he poured out his heart to the horse in his corral. He understood the wild mare's language of fear and pride far better than he understood the quiet, sad woman who now shared his home. A month passed in the silent rhythm of the Flying T Ranch. Rose's presence had become a quiet, constant feature of the homestead, like the whisper of the wind through the prairie grass. The house was cleaner, the meals were warmer, but the emotional distance between her and Jed remained as vast as the Montana sky. Jed continued to spend his days in the far corral, his patient, silent battle of wills with the wild Palomino mare becoming the central focus of his life. He had made little progress. The horse, Ghost, still refused any attempt at contact, her spirit as wild and unbroken as the day she was captured. The turning point came during a sudden, violent thunderstorm that swept across the plains with no warning. A bolt of lightning, terrifyingly close, struck an old cottonwood tree near the corral, splitting it in two with a deafening crack. The entire ranch was thrown into chaos. The horses in the main stables whinnied and kicked at their stalls. But in the far corral, Ghost's reaction was far more extreme. The sound, the flash of light, sent her into a blind, primal panic. Jed and his ranch hands rushed to the corral to find the mare in a state of pure terror. She was crashing against the wooden fences, her eyes wide with a white-hot fear. She had already scraped her flank raw on a splintered post, and it was clear that in her blind panic, she would soon injure herself fatally. The men tried to approach, to calm her, but she was beyond reason, lashing out with her hooves at anything that came near. Jed, for the first time, felt a sense of helpless despair. The very spirit he admired in her was now going to be the cause of her death. He ordered his men to back away, afraid they would only make it worse. It was then that Rose appeared. She had been watching from the porch, her face pale with worry. While the other men saw a dangerous, out-of-control animal, she saw only pure, unadulterated terror. She walked calmly towards the corral, ignoring Jed's sharp command to stay back. She did not enter the ring. She simply stood by the fence, her small frame a stark contrast to the violent chaos within. And then, she began to sing. It was not a grand, powerful song. It was a simple, quiet lullaby, a melody from her childhood in the green fields of Ohio, a song her own mother used to sing to calm her during storms. Her voice was not trained or perfect, but it was clear, pure, and filled with a profound, maternal gentleness. The effect was instantaneous and utterly magical. The frantic horse, which had been deaf to the shouts of the cowboys, seemed to catch the sound. She stopped her crashing against the fence, her head lifting, her ears twitching, trying to locate the source of this strange, calming melody. Rose continued to sing, her voice never wavering, her eyes fixed on the terrified animal. Slowly, miraculously, the panic in the horse's eyes began to recede. The wild, desperate heaving of her chest began to slow. She took a hesitant step towards the sound, then another. Jed and his men stood in stunned, absolute silence, watching this impossible scene unfold. The plain, quiet woman from the east was taming the untamable beast with nothing but a simple song. Ghost walked until she was standing directly in front of Rose, separated only by the wooden fence. She stood perfectly still, her body still trembling, but her gaze was soft, completely captivated by the gentle voice. Rose slowly, cautiously, reached her hand through the fence. She did not touch the horse's head or neck. She gently touched the horse's velvety muzzle, continuing her soft, wordless lullaby. Ghost did not pull away. She leaned into the touch, a low, rumbling sigh escaping her lips. Jed stared, his heart pounding in his chest. In that moment, he saw the incredible, hidden strength of the woman he had married. She possessed a power he, for all his experience, did not. A power born not of force or technique, but of pure, unadulterated empathy. He had spent a month trying to speak to the horse's wildness. She had, in a matter of minutes, spoken directly to its soul. After the storm had passed and the horse was calm, Jed walked over to Rose as she was leaving the corral. He was humbled and completely in awe. For the first time, he looked at her not as a replacement for the wife he was promised, not as a hard-working servant, but as an equal, a partner. He saw a soul as rare and as beautiful as the wild horse she had just soothed. I've never seen anything like that in my life. Sometimes, the most frightened souls don't need to be broken. They just need to be reminded that they're safe. Her words, so simple, so wise, struck a chord deep within him. He realized, with a jolt, that she wasn't just talking about the horse. She was talking about him, too. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, the first real bridge between them had finally been built, not of shared work, but of a shared, profound understanding of a wounded spirit. Rose's calming of the wild mare, Ghost, was a turning point that shifted the very foundations of their arrangement. The invisible wall between them had been irrevocably breached. Jed no longer retreated into silence. He began to seek her out, not just for meals, but for companionship. He would ask for her help with the horses, valuing her quiet, intuitive approach. He was astonished to discover that her gentle, musical way with Ghost was not a fluke. She had a natural, profound gift with all animals, especially the most troubled ones. She possessed a patience that he, for all his skill, had never quite mastered. Their evenings were no longer spent in silence. They would sit on the porch, watching the stars, and he would tell her stories of the constellations, stories his own father had taught him. She, in turn, would tell him of the green hills of Ohio, of the names of the wildflowers that grew there. He learned that the scar on her brow, the one he had first seen as a mark of plainness, was from a childhood accident when she had climbed a tree to rescue a stranded kitten. Slowly, painfully, he was unlearning the image of the ugly sister and discovering the vibrant, beautiful soul that lay beneath. For the first time in 10 years, the big, empty house began to feel like a home. Rose, basking in his newfound respect and gentle attention, began to bloom. The hunted, worried look in her eyes was replaced by a soft, quiet confidence. The outside world, however, had not forgotten them. The weekly mail rider, a rare visitor to the remote ranch, arrived one afternoon with a single letter. It was for Rose. She recognized the elegant, looping handwriting immediately. It was from her sister, Lily. A cold, familiar dread washed over her, extinguishing the warm glow of her recent happiness. She had hoped, prayed, that her family would simply forget she existed. She retreated to the barn, to the comforting presence of Ghost, to read the letter in private. Jed watched her go, a worried frown creasing his brow. He saw the way her shoulders slumped, the way the light seemed to drain from her face. An hour later, when she did not return, he went to find her. He found her in Ghost's stall, huddled in the hay, weeping with a silent, body-racking grief that was terrifying in its intensity. The cruel, open letter lay discarded on the ground beside her. He knelt beside her, his heart aching with a fierce, protective anger. He didn't know what the letter said, but he knew it had caused this. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and this time, she did not flinch. She leaned into his touch, her defenses completely shattered. It was then, amidst the scent of hay and horses, that she finally told him everything. The dam of a lifetime of pain finally broke. This was the plot twist, the full, ugly truth behind the joke her family had played. She told him that the letter from Lily was filled with a triumphant, mocking cruelty. It described in lavish detail Lily's new life, her wealthy fiancé, her beautiful dresses. It asked, with venomous sarcasm, if the old dirt-poor cowboy had thrown her out yet, and if she was enjoying her life as a prairie hag. But it was more than just the letter. She confessed the truth of her entire life. She had never been a daughter in her family. She had been a servant. While Lily was praised for her beauty and sent to dancing lessons, Rose was kept at home, mending, cooking, and tending to the gardens. She was useful Rose, plain Rose. Her scar was not just a mark on her skin, but a constant excuse for her mother to call her unmarriageable, an object of pity. Being sent to him was not just a convenience. It was the final, callous act of disposal, a way to be rid of the ugly daughter for good, so they could focus all their resources on the pretty one. She had lived her entire life believing she was worthless, a burden, a joke. And just as she had started to believe she could be something more, this letter had come like a voice from the grave, reminding her of the prison she thought she had escaped. Jed listened, his heart breaking with every word. The quiet sadness he had seen in her on the first day now had a name: abuse. The cruelty of her family was a thing he could barely comprehend. He finally understood. Her tireless work ethic was not just diligence. It was a desperate attempt to earn her place. Her silence was not just shyness. It was a shield, built over years of being told her voice didn't matter. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell her she was beautiful. He simply sat with her in the hay, his quiet, solid presence, a silent rebuttal to every cruel word she had ever heard. He wrapped an arm around her trembling shoulders, and for the first time, she did not feel like an object of pity, but a woman who was finally, truly, being seen. As Rose's heartbreaking story filled the quiet space of the barn, a profound change occurred in Jedediah Vance. The quiet, patient man disappeared, and in his place was a cold, hard fury. It was a controlled rage, the kind that simmers deep and is far more dangerous than any loud explosion. His anger was not directed at Rose, but at the faceless, cruel family 1,000 miles away who had dared to treat this precious, gentle soul like a piece of refuse. He had spent 10 years of his life paralyzed by a grief he couldn't control. He would not stand by and watch another good person be crushed by the cruelty of others. He sat with her until her tears subsided, his presence a silent, solid anchor in her storm of grief. He then helped her to her feet, his touch gentle but firm. He looked into her red-rimmed, swollen eyes, and she saw not pity, but a fierce, protective fire she had never seen before. He did not say much, but his words were a vow. No one gets to call you worthless, not anymore. This was his all-in moment, the moment he stopped being her benefactor and became her champion. He knew that simple words of comfort would fade, but in action, a clear and public declaration would last forever. The next morning, he hitched the best wagon. Not the old, rough buckboard she had arrived in, but his personal, well-kept carriage. He told her to put on her best dress, a simple but clean Sunday dress she had painstakingly mended. He told her they were going to town. She was confused and a little frightened, not knowing his intentions, but she trusted the new, resolute strength in his eyes. They did not go to the general store or the post office. He drove the carriage directly to the largest and most prestigious horse fair in the entire territory, an event that drew ranchers and buyers from 3 states. It was a world of powerful men, of big money and bigger reputations. Jed, a respected figure in this world, led her through the throng, ignoring the curious and sometimes judgmental stares. He led her to the central auction ring, but he was not there to buy or sell. He waited for the auctioneer to take a break, and then, in front of the entire, powerful assembly of the territory's finest horsemen, he stepped onto the platform. He asked Rose to join him. Trembling, she did. A hush fell over the crowd. What was the quiet, reclusive Jed Vance doing? He spoke, his voice clear and strong, ringing across the auction yard. He did not speak of her family or their cruelty. He did not speak of their arrangement. He spoke only of her. Gentlemen, most of you know me. You know I value only 2 things in this world: an honest heart and a fine horse. For the past few months, I've had the privilege of knowing the finest horse whisperer I have ever seen. A woman with a gift so rare it's a blessing from God himself. He then told them the story of the storm, of the wild, untamable mare named Ghost, and of how this quiet woman had calmed the savage beast with nothing but a simple song. He spoke of her patience, her empathy, her incredible, intuitive connection with the most broken of spirits. Then, he turned to her. In front of everyone, he took her calloused, hard-working hand in his. Her family sent her to me thinking she was plain. They were wrong. She is the rarest and most beautiful soul I have ever known, and I am honored to announce that she has agreed to be my wife. He had not asked her. It was a declaration, a stunning, public gamble. He was publicly claiming her, tying his own formidable reputation to hers, daring anyone in that crowd to ever look at her as anything less than the chosen partner of Jedediah Vance. He was rewriting her story, not in a private letter, but on the biggest stage he could find. Rose stared at him, her heart pounding, tears welling in her eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of a joy so profound it was almost painful. For the first time in her life, someone had not only seen her worth, but had declared it to the world. The ride back from the horse fair was a world away from the silent, awkward journey that had first brought them to the ranch. A wave of congratulations and respectful nods had followed them as they left the auction yard. Jed's public, unwavering declaration had not just silenced any potential gossip, it had instantly established Rose as a woman of immense, albeit quiet, importance. She sat beside him on the carriage seat, not as a discarded sister or a mail-order bride, but as his chosen partner, his equal. The shame she had carried for a lifetime had been lifted, blown away by the force of his simple, public words of praise. She was quiet for a long time, her mind trying to process the enormity of what he had done. He had not just defended her, he had celebrated her. He had seen the very qualities her family had dismissed as plain and useless, and he had held them up to the world as a rare and precious gift. When she finally spoke, her voice was a soft whisper. "Rose, you did not have to do that. I know, I wanted to." And in that simple exchange, everything was understood. His public proposal had been a gamble, but as she looked at him, her heart filled with a love and gratitude so profound it left her breathless. She gave him her silent, tearful answer. Their final confrontation was not with armed men, but with the ghosts of the past, and it was fought not with weapons, but with ink and paper. The next day, Jed did not take her to the lawyer's office to fight. He took her there to heal. Together, they sat down, and with the lawyer's help, they drafted a letter. It was a calm, dignified, and final response to the cruelty of her family. The letter did not contain anger or accusations. It simply stated the facts. It informed them that Rose Lowell had arrived safely, that she had been welcomed with the respect she deserved, and that she had accepted Jedediah Vance's proposal of marriage. It formally and legally renounced any claim her family had on her, and respectfully requested that they never contact her again. It was not a plea for acceptance. It was a declaration of independence. As Rose signed her name at the bottom, her hand did not tremble. It was the firm, steady signature of a free woman. They sent the letter with the next eastbound train, a final, quiet closing of a painful chapter in her life. 6 months later, a wedding was held on the Flying T Ranch. It was not a large affair, but it was filled with genuine joy. The guests were the ranch hands and their families, the people who had come to love and respect the quiet, gentle woman who had a magical way with their horses. Rose did not wear a fancy, store-bought dress. She wore a simple, elegant gown that she had sewn herself, embroidered with the images of the wildflowers that now bloomed in her beautiful, thriving garden. She was not given away by a father. She was escorted to the ceremony by Ghost, the magnificent Palomino mare, who followed her with a trusting, gentle deference, a living symbol of Rose's own healed spirit. As Jedediah took her hand, he looked into her eyes, no longer shadowed by sadness, but shining with a radiant, confident light. He knew, with an absolute certainty, that he was the luckiest man in the territory. "Your family sent me a woman they thought was plain. They had no idea they were sending me the only partner who could ever match the spirit of this land, and the only woman who could ever heal the silence in my own heart. They thought they sent me to a lonely life, but they sent me home, and as they were declared husband and wife, surrounded by the horses they loved and the community that had embraced them, they both knew the truth. True beauty is not a thing of perfect faces or fancy dresses. It is a thing of quiet strength, of a kind heart, and of a spirit that, no matter how badly bent, refuses to be broken." The lonely cowboy and the ugly sister had found in each other a love that was not a joke, but a profound and beautiful truth.